Greetings. Thank you for joining us on this Voices from the Front Lines webinar. My name is Tom Bassford, and I am the founder and the executive director of Significant Matters. We're an organization that's focused on helping the church kind of figure out how to move beyond the helping that hurts message. And folks that have read books like Toxic Charity and Helping Hurts. We started doing something about 6 years ago, an event called SAT Talks. And the whole idea behind it was that as we saw more and more people, churches that is, that were trying to figure out how to kind of move beyond that narrative, they were looking for some examples of people that were maybe a little bit further down the learning curve than they were. So we thought if we could bring those folks together and tell their stories in a TED Talk type of a way, that we could begin to help the church picture some of the things that they could do differently, and some of the partners that they could work with. Because the truth is, nobody has this whole thing figured out. How we create sustainable and lasting solutions through church missions is not something that anybody has yet figured out. But there are some folks that are a little bit further on down the road than the rest of us that can give us some advice and some ideas. So we decided in the midst of this pandemic, we can't do TED Talks, that this might be a great opportunity for us to tap into this whole webinar idea. And what if we could bring together some of these voices that are talking about missions, everything from business's mission, which we're going to be talking about today, to the soup kitchen and what we do with homeless, which we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks. All of those things there are underlying principles behind all of those things that could help the North American church better understand what they might do and how they might reframe their understanding of poverty and their approaches to poverty. So what if we could start pulling some of those folks together in those particular areas, and in the process have these webinars where we let them talk to us and answer the question, what do you need most from the North American church? And really, that's the question that we want to get to. We want to have, quite frankly, a hard conversation and suggest that there are some things that the North American church could do and should do, need to do, if it's going to be effective in its work, especially among the material poor as we move into the 21st century. So this week, we're going to be talking about the whole idea of enterprise solutions and ways in which the church could participate in those kinds of things, both to spread the gospel and to help people caught in material poverty. I'm delighted to introduce you to our panelists this morning from all across the country and really across the world. People that I've come to know personally and that I've had speak at various SAT Talk events in the past. So as I introduce you, if we could pull up their video screens, that would be great. We have Larry Sharp, who works with IBEC Ventures and very much involved in the business's mission global work, and does a wonderful job of working with seminaries and churches and various other institutions trying to help the church better understand that. Jeff Coffey, who I've gotten to know recently, and Jeff is doing some work with tying flies and how that interfaces with human trafficking outside of the United States. And then Don Larson. So Don Larson is coming to us all the way from Mozambique. So Don is the one guy out there actually living in that space that we're talking about. And that's not to suggest that that's where everybody needs to be, but what Don is doing with the Sunshine Nut Company to make money with the poor is just a fascinating thing. He is the business guy in this. The rest of us really have background in clergy and that sort of stuff. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this panel today.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start off with kind of a general question with each of you guys, if you don't mind. So let me start with you, Larry. And here's the question for each of you. Now, what is it your organization does that you are so passionate about, and how did you get that way? And what I mean by that is that, you know, none of you are doing what you're doing right now. None of you were doing that 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I mean, it's been a journey to get to where you're at, to be passionate about the things that we're talking about in this webinar right now. So give us a little bit idea about your organization, why you're so passionate about it, and how'd you get that way. Larry?
Oh, thank you, Tom. And just a quick background. I came out of the mission industry, strong connections to the local church. We are still supported as missional people from several churches, a strong believer in the church. But 15 years ago, in my organization where I was VP of operations, realized that we were in the unreached countries, mainly the 1040 window, and we were faking it. And we realized that there was some loss of integrity in that. And it wasn't just our agency, it was basically everybody. In other words, we were in a country such as a Muslim country or China, places like that, and we were trying to be missionaries and to try to bring the gospel to the unreached. And we were telling them that we were business people, but we really weren't. And so that began a journey, as you mentioned, Tom, a journey toward where we are now. And as we go, we're still learning. And so we started a consulting group called IBEC Ventures, and I've been with that for the last 15 years. What we do is to help God's people in the church connect with what God is doing, because it's God at work, not the church at work. I'll talk maybe a little bit more about that later, to bring His name and His glory to the nations.
Thanks, Larry. We may have lost his video stream. So I'm going to jump over to you, Jeff, and Larry, if there's more to that, we may come back to you. But Jeff, a little bit about your organization, why you're so passionate about it, and how'd you get this way?
Well, Tom, as you mentioned, I have a clergy background. My wife and I are both Bible college trained, and we went off right away to the mission field. We worked on Indian reservations across Canada and really tried to do cross-cultural church planting and in our training. And we found some struggles with some of the models there. We found struggles with personal support. And it really came to a head for us. One day, the chief of the tribe we were working with offered for us to start a company on the reservation. It would be a computer repair, and in exchange for that, they would give us a house and we would have income. But that raised a whole lot of problems inside of the mission organization. All of a sudden, my support wouldn't be coming through the organization. There was a fear that we wouldn't be manageable and all of those kinds of things. So that I would say that was kind of step one of God opening our eyes for where He was going to draw us and how He was going to use us uniquely as a family. We went from there to church planting, and again, just finding that struggle for how is it that we reach our community when we sit separated from our community, right? Like business sits at the center of everything. Everybody works, everybody wants to eat. And so it's been a journey. And God really laid on our hearts, His heart, which is a passion for the widow, the orphan, and the alien. And really what we believe He means in that is those that are exploited and exploitable. So decided to start this little company called Fair Flies. And we do a whole lot more than just flies. We're in the angling industry as a whole. And what we're seeing is this deep engagement in our own culture through this, as well as we've been intentional. And everywhere that we go to set up production, we pay double living wages, and we intentionally hire women directly out of the red light districts and work closely with the orphanages, because we believe in trade, not aid, is more sustainable. And we believe God is in our work and in our business. We're supposed to work as unto Him anyway. So that's a little bit of who we are and what we do.
Thanks, Jeff. Don, how about you?
What gets me excited and passionate? It's clearly seeing human beings flourish. Our business model and why we moved here was to implement transformation. And so we did it through a food factory, which is an engine for transformation. But I think seeing just all the different links in the value chain here be touched through just a demonstration in business of God's love, and so that radical love of, taking care of and providing a market for smallholder farmers, to providing employment, to doing a reverse tithe with our company proceeds, taking care of the poor, the widowed, and the orphaned, has provided us a lot of opportunity to see, the employees getting a paycheck for the first time was amazing. Pulling orphans out from the street and putting them into a home was absolutely amazing. And these are tear-jerking moments that really have no words to describe. So I would say, and it's not just that, it was even the government and the trust and the pride of a product that is now going all over the world has broken down barriers. And so it's seeing this transformation and just about every touch point of what we do, and seeing people say, thank you for walking the talk. Thank you for demonstrating God's love instead of just talking about it. And so it's been a really, really a wonderful experience that way. We moved here in 2011, and we formed the Sunshine Nut Company. We opened up the factory in 2013. In 2014, we entered the U.S. market, and we're in quickly most of the premium retailers. It's been a tough environment. There's a lot of obstacles, and it's not just the sub-Saharan African conditions. It's just the world system coming up against acts of things of God. And so it's really been eye-opening to me that with all the greatness comes a lot of spiritual warfare and a lot of obstacles. So we've been very blessed, and I think transformation and flourishing of individuals comes top to my mind of the benefits of what we see.
So this is the comment towards the participants. We are going to spend about the last 15 minutes, or we're going to spend about 15 or 20 minutes in Q&A. So we are going to do that. Any one of these gentlemen here have enough to talk about for the next 2 hours. So we've kind of rehearsed the things that we are going to talk about. We have a rough outline of where we're going with all of this, but it's important for us to have some kind of a conversation with you, the participants. We're so grateful that you're here. And we hope that you'll ask them some probing questions. We may not get to all of your questions, but we are definitely going to spend 15 or 20 minutes towards the end, giving you an opportunity to talk or to ask some questions or to make some comments to these gentlemen. So feel free to start sending those in along the way, and we will get to them shortly. So let me jump into some of the questions. We're going to jump around a little bit to the different panelists. Let me go back to you, Larry. Talk a little bit about your model and how is it that it pushes against the traditional church mission model? In what ways does it kind of push or challenge that?
Yeah, it kind of turns the whole traditional model on its head. In other words, it's based theologically in the idea that the church is not on mission, but God is on mission, and God through his people. And so what that does then to the church is it's incumbent upon the church we get this in Ephesians 4:12, to equip the saints for ministry, to build up the body so that the body goes out in ministry. The Don Larsons of the world, the Jeff Coffees of the world are on mission for God in his mission. And the church's role is to equip people for that. And it's amazing I've taken so many people abroad. I remember standing in the airport in Frankfurt after being in Central Asia with a vice president of Conoco who had spent his whole career in the Baptist church in Houston. And he said to me, I never once heard that I could contribute to the Great Commission with the skills that God gave me. Never heard that. And he was 60. And that is what really revolutionized, it will revolutionize the local church when they get a hold of that God is on mission, Missio Dei. And so I think the late 20th century was unique in world missions, because before that and today, it is God's people with their profession, with their skill set, incarnating the gospel through job creation, like we just heard from Don, and then that earns the right for proclamation. So that's unique. And one last comment, another biblical foundation for that, besides Ephesians, is the book of Acts. And guess what? In Acts 8, when the church dispersed from Jerusalem, there was no First Baptist Church to create the support. There was no seminary to go to. There was nobody. They just went and they took Jesus to the world. And that's the 21st century for me.
Thanks. Well, and there you've got Don. Don's living proof of that out there. So we'll get to that. Don, I'm sorry. I want to ask Jeff something. So same question, Jeff. What is it about your model that pushes the traditional church missions model?
Yeah, we have intentionally looked to go out as missionaries, but have chosen not to do that under the 501c3 model. And we found that churches so often want to define ministry based on a tax status. And we believe that by being in the workplace and being intentional with our time, we're in places that are not open to the gospel whatsoever. It's changing the missional model. We're creating income and we're blending that sacred and secular that is so often separated. We're saying, no, it's all God. It's all in the same box. And so, the conversations we get to have after somebody's first payday, they're the conversations that you don't get to have 5 years as a traditional missionary, right? I'm not nearly as involved in somebody's life when all I'm doing is meeting people for coffee and trying to break into the circles of families in a new culture or a new location. Instead, I'm just part of the day in and day out instantly. And we see so much more cultural penetration in short periods of time, a month or 2 months, not 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and you know what, it's interesting, and each of you have seen this and said this, and I've seen it as well, is the whole transaction between the missionary and the indigenous people has changed. So, I mean, there's a dignity in genuinely and legitimately providing the means by which a person can provide for their own family. So now people aren't standing in front of you, the great Westerner, with their hands out, hoping that you're going to give them something, and then just waiting for the next Westerner to come around to give them something. I mean, they are experiencing what all of us would want to experience if we were in their shoes, and that is the means to be a hero in my own home.
Yeah.
Not for somebody else. All right, so we're here to push a little bit on the North American church. It'd be fair to say that all four of us on this call have experienced certain levels of frustration with the North American church. So we're all churchmen. We all love the church. We're not here to grind an axe or anything, but we are here in hopes that we can spur the church on to think a little more creatively, and to risk a little bit more, especially in terms of how they might connect and mobilize marketplace people, business-minded people. So, Jeff, question for you. You kind of come out of the clergy background, as do I. And my question to you is, how well does the average pastor get what the three of you are talking about on this webinar? How well does the average North American pastor get it?
It's really tough. It's a really tough answer. I would say my experience has been they don't, and I'll give a very poignant kind of feedback to that. Even my own church, and I love the people. I love this community. They're our home church. But when the missions reports are given in front of the body, there are no dots over where we do work. And the hard part of that for me is that we know that we are the church living out its purpose. We know that. There's no question between us and God. He's given us direction. We know what we're set out to do. But it's difficult and lonely, I would say, to not be recognized by my own church as someone who's doing ministry, who's doing kingdom work. Not because we want any praise or credit for anywhere that we're doing anything, more just the recognition that we are the church, and we're just not. We're considered separate from, and yet our entire purpose is to bring the kingdom into places we couldn't go without this model.
So just briefly then, why do you imagine, or what do you imagine the disconnect is? You say that the average church, the average pastor doesn't get what you're trying to do. Why do you think that is?
Well, as the phrase that my good friend Larry has taught me over the years, it's that sacred secular divide. It's that you either work for God or you work for mammon, right? This idea that has been taken way too far. The thought that because it's a for-profit organization that somehow we're conflicted in our service to the kingdom. And I think that comes from training a different mindset, that every dollar that is earned, A, is a blessing. I am not my provider. God is my provider. B, that the funds are his in the first place to do and to be intentional. They're not for me to build up security, 401ks, properties. And so it kind of flies in the face of American culture as a whole, right? And a pastor's job is trying to maintain his flock. And there's this line where if all of a sudden money becomes part of the problem, I mean, I know pastors that have turned down being given nice cars because the car was too nice, and they were afraid of the optics of that. And I think that creates this challenge, and on the other side of it, as a missionary, we'd get care boxes, and we'd get open tubes of toothpaste and used underwear, and as missionary support. There's this separation that we put around funds, and instead of seeing it as an opportunity, we see it as a roadblock. So
you came out of a clergy background, youth ministry, and various other things over the course of lifetime. I want to go to the other side of that. Don, you're totally different. You came out of senior VP level with Hershey. You're doing Hershey cocoa plants across the world. You're living large. You have the American dream, and then some. And yet you get to a point where it's not enough. So you formed your business model. You're doing some of the same things, but you came at it from a whole different place. How did you form your business model, Don?
Yeah, well, let me first kind of clarify that I felt so unfulfilled with reaching that level of like, this isn't it. This is what God does not want me to do. And so I actually quit to become a pastor. I told my wife, hey, we're living at large, but learn how to save foil and clean out Ziploc baggies, because we're going to be poor the rest of our lives, but I want to follow God. I want to go deeper. And so I entered into it. I had a couple years of intensity because I had sold off. I quit Hershey and built the largest cocoa processing factory in the world out of Philadelphia that was sold to the largest chocolate maker in Switzerland. And I had some time, and I'm like, I'm surrendering to the Lord. And, I had it with business and a lot of this, the filth of business for and it's not Hershey. Hershey's probably the best company. I don't want to give that impression, but I surrendered, and God clearly, after going into seminary and doing things, said, hey, no. I want you going back into business, but I want you to be what I call an economic, missionary warrior. I want you going in and demonstrating business from a God's perspective. So my model, I was in the pastor mode. I was in the 100% nonprofit, I'm going to give it all away mode. I was, clearly looking at this as a ministry. So I'm like, well, how would God do this? Well, he would include the poorest of the poor, which is the smallholder farmers, the subsistence farmers that are eking by with growing. I would include the poor, the widowed, and the orphan. I would give generously. So we developed a reverse tithe, give back 90%. And I would also go up against the major fundamental obstacles which are creating poverty, and those are very evident. So that's how I formed the model. It was a belief that that God would want to do business this way. And when I got into the practicality of it all, nonprofit was very difficult to do. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll switch it. And we went for profit. And I will tell you that is probably the most important decision I made, because as Jeff talked about, where I go, I'm embraced as a businessman. They all know I have a very strong faith. And I am invited to different groups like the Nobel Peace Prize Forum, United Nations, all these groups. I sit on a lot of panels of the role of religion in business with Muslims, Hindus, Confucius. I had a Confucius and and I share my testimony. And I get so many from the audience, from so many different religions, and they love it. And they say, we love Jesus, but we love what you're doing and the demonstration of God permeating through every part of your business. And it just opens up this incredible forum for discussion with all the barriers dropping to say, what is it really that Jesus is about? And what is it really? Do you know James 1:27, where God says true religion is to take care of widows and orphans in their distress? It's just, these are things that are like, they're just breaking down the wall and inviting themselves to learn more. And that is everywhere. That's every link of the value chain. And I think it's really, really easy in a business context.
You found tremendous receptivity, and I've been to Mozambique. I've seen the work that you're doing, even the orphanage work, which to me is a brilliant model in which you're not just taking care of the orphans, but the widows and the mamas across Africa that are abandoned by husbands as well. You've found a way and a model in which you keep those orphan children in the culture, and you actually help the mamas of the village care for those kids as well. I'm kind of telling a part of your story here, but then
can I share that?
What's that?
Can I share that concept?
Yeah, please do.
So that concept, we intended to take care of orphanages, established orphanages. I don't want to be in the orphan business. I want to make cashews and other fine food products and get them into the stores all over the world. But as God always does, he's like, hey, I want to do something new, and I want to do something breakthrough, and so we were faced with 3 orphans that we had been working with established orphanages. And by the way, the former foreign minister on my first trip to Mozambique invited me out to dinner. I told him what I was planning on doing. He toured me all around the country, but he said, do not hire adult orphans into your factory. I was previously the Minister of Health and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we got tons of problems all over the country from people who have aged out of orphans with Western influence. These people, they have no grasp. They are dependent, they're entitled, they want a Western lifestyle. They can't function within a Mozambique environment. And with that premise, and looking at the orphanages and everything, we developed a concept which I learned from Hershey. Milton Hershey has hundreds of houses. They are probably the first social impact company. 100 years ago, Milton Hershey gave everything to an orphan school. An orphanage has the controlling interest of an $8 billion company. But we took the concept of buying homes all around surrounding our factory, fixing them up, and then pairing up a widow with 3 to 4 orphans and creating a family and nurturing that family. And it worked out so well that now the government is looking at us and is inspired by what we've done, because it is just a wonderful concept. So much so that even the neighborhood around each of our sunshine houses loves it. And we've now have a day program where preschool kids come and they're given a Bible story, food, health care. Mainly they're just loved on by the widow. And so we call it the Beacons of Light program. That's just one component of many different components of what we're doing in this overarching holistic approach to solving poverty that's centered around an engine of transformation, which is the Sunshine Approach business model.
And there's so much more. I hope you folks will take the opportunity. Each of these gentlemen have done a SAT talk. You can find that out on our YouTube channel. You can get a little more details about their stories and what they're doing. Their websites will tell a whole lot more as well. Just fascinating something. One of my observations, Don, that I have seen so much with business-minded people, business people in particular, and I'm clergy, I'm an ordained pastor in the church. I love that. I have no regrets for my journey, but I have found that business people are problem solvers in ways that pastors are not necessarily trained. I mean, we just don't hone that skill the same way that business people do. And I found what you did with that whole orphan thing to be really heartening and a demonstration, again, I think, of one of the upsides of understanding the capacity of business-minded people. They will problem solve things like that. They won't just get a cashew company going. They'll get that going one way or the other. But along the way, as they recognize other problems, they will put that problem-solving skill to work in other ways. So Don, I want to ask you kind of the opposite. I want to ask you about a different person in the equation. I asked Jeff about how much does the average pastor get the kinds of things that we're talking about on this webinar? And he said, not really. How well does the average business-minded person in the church relate to the things that we're talking about here?
I do a lot of talks, and the business people, it's like unlocking a mystery that they've been searching for all their lives. But yet there is not a vessel or a vehicle for them to allow them to do that. You know, and so the church has an incredible opportunity to properly motivate these individuals and change the face of missions trips. You know, I look at these missions trips and they come in and the people here, you know, they're like, okay, we're going to paint this building for the 47th time, or we're going to build a church, and the locals all stand around like, oh my gosh, it's horrendous. You know, I mean, we're going to have to rip it all down and redo it once they leave. You know, our business model is a quadruple bottom line business model. And the last component is financial, environmental, and social. I've added a transformational objective. Everything we do, I look at it from how do we transform lives, okay? And the transformation, if doctors call me, you know, I had a Forbes article one time and doctors call, we have dentists call and teachers call. I'm like, doctors, you're not going to come treat patients. I'm going to align you with doctors here, and you're going to share what you know. And guess what? These are not stupid doctors. They have no resources. They're going to teach you a whole bunch of things. It's been 4 or 5 years of bringing teacher teams in. You're not teaching kids. You're teaching teachers, and you're sharing with teachers. And those teachers, they're like, you got it easy. You know, if I were in an air conditioning with 25 kids with the curriculum and all the resources, yeah, I could teach really well. Why don't you go sit out under a tree in 105-degree weather and try and teach 60 kids? You know, so, and they understand now they are incredibly, incredibly thankful, grateful for the teachings that they get. But do you see every different profession that's sitting out there in those American church pews are sitting there saying, how can I be a part of God's work? And the answer is there's so many opportunities if things are aligned the right way from a missions environment.
Don, thanks. Larry, let me go to you. So, I mean, how about you? Where do you find the greatest receptivity to the work that you're doing?
Well, I will emphasize something that Don didn't, but for me, it's obviously God's people in the marketplace, in our churches, when the light goes on and they see that they can use their skill, and that's gigantic. But I'd like to address a second one, and it's a challenge to the church, is to understand the millennial mind. And I'm no expert in that, but I do know a few things, such as millennials see the world in a more holistic way, that they see poverty. I remember one time my daughter came home from work. She's an HR person with World Vision, and she was sitting in front of the computer crying. I said, "What are you crying?" She said, "I just saw what's going on in Banda Aceh after the tsunami and all the hurting people." So they see that in different variances, and they also are much more relational, and they want to be involved. They don't want to just give their money. They don't want to just pray. They want to do that, but they want to be involved. So taking that understanding of millennials, just two quick stories. I took I'm with the Freedom Business Alliance. I'm chairman of the board there. And so I took my grandkids, 3 of them, to Cambodia. We visited 7 freedom businesses. And partway through, my oldest grandson, who's a student at Baylor, he said, "Grandpa, this is what I want to do with my life." Because he saw these businesses transforming lives, bringing them out of the trafficked industry, giving them a skill so that they could be employable and their lives could improve. And they were seeing the gospel lived out, and there was that as an opportunity to proclaim it. And he said, "Grandpa, that's what I want to do with my life." And the second story is, I was teaching at a Christian university in Western Canada, and on these themes. And on the third day, a young lady, older millennial, but definitely millennial, came to me and said, "This has been transforming." And she was the owner of the largest placement agency in Western Canada. And I said, "Well, what's so transformative about this?" And she said, "I've been in the church all my life. I run my business with integrity." She had hundreds of employees. And she said, "I never connected my business with what God's doing in the world." And today she has started multiple businesses in Central America to address the poorest of the poor there. And so that connection, those people get it. And what an amazing resource for the church to empower those people and unleash their skills and their passion, and let them, as your members, go to the world in the name of Jesus.
You know, before we transition now, then I want to talk a little with Don and Jeff about the whole millennial thing. And let me suggest why. There is so much being written in the church today, in the North American church, about millennials, about the nons, as they're being described in terms of identifying with any particular religion. And yet I am like you, Larry. I am finding that millennials, they don't have the same baggage that us baby boomers have, to some extent, with the church and various things that we've got. They just don't. I mean, it's not that they necessarily resent the church or hate it. This is my experience. But many of them are just going, "I'm glad, that's good for you." It's just not relevant to them. But the connection between human flourishing and the claims of Christ is seamless to the average millennial. And it would seem to me that any pastor that would want to understand how to regain some sense of relevance in the North American culture today would lean deeply into this, to borrow your phrase, Jeff, the erasure of this secular sacred divide, and understand the millennials' mind. And I believe they're just dying for churches that are out there on the front end of the kinds of things that you folks are talking about. Jeff, are you finding any of that to be true with millennials that you run into?
Yeah, it's really interesting on several fronts. One is I have two millennials in my household, our two older daughters. So this is a regular conversation for us. And the experience that we have and what we're seeing with that generation is that they're more relational, like you said, more connected. And I really believe that God doesn't call us to a thing. Sometimes he calls us to a place. But what he's really calling us into is relationship, right? And so by separating all of these things, we've created all of these separate boxes. And now we have to figure out how these boxes where does God fit in each of these boxes? That's just wipe that out, wipe out the whole concept. Instead, it's about relationship. What's he calling me to do today? How has he created me to uniquely serve him? And if I want to serve God, I don't necessarily have to go to seminary to do that or Bible college, right? I can serve God wherever he tells me to go, but I've got to be in relationship to hear that. And my hope for this generation of millennials is that they are freed of the shackles we've created around this idea of I can serve God, or I can get a job and write checks for people to go serve God. Instead, that it's all one and the same, and that I need the training, I need the equipping, and that's what our churches should be stepping up and doing. In my opinion is more training and equipping to go. So I think they're more primed. I think this generation, they do care more. They're buying with conscience. So as we talk about fair flies, it's about free trade, and it's about how workers are treated. That speaks to them. And I can't tell you, I mean, I don't wear my faith on my sleeve on the business side of things, but everywhere I go and speak, somebody walks up and says, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" They know the difference of the church and Christ and the thought of bringing hope, even if that doesn't make me wealthy. So
Super. Don, what's your experience with millennials in this subject?
Yeah, they're like, they're all over the place with what we're doing. And I go to food shows, where there's thousands of booths and all, and they're just searching and wanting something like this. And you go to the food shows and everyone's got a gimmick, everyone's trying to do the fair trade thing and taking care, but a lot of it's not substantive. Okay, it's more marketing. Okay, this is where the church has an incredible opportunity to be the leaders in this, because it's to the core of who we are. It is God's heart. Okay, and so I like to really draw millennials in. They have, I don't know whether it's in the schools and look at the socialist issues, and the propensity towards different ways of thinking away from capitalism, and the church, I believe, I've had the church explain that, hey, business is bad, it's not good. What if business were good? What if it was, you look at the conscious capitalism movements and all these other things. What if it satisfied every longing that the millennial has, which is to take care of people, to improve the environment. There's so many different things that are important to millennials that are part of this. And the church is missing it, I think, and guess what? Other religions aren't. And the non-religions, the secular world's got this in spades. They're out there with the NGOs and everything, and they're high flying. And that is a major draw for the millennials away from the church. Same with the Muslims. Aga Khan, these foundations, they come in, they provide employment, they take care of the people holistically, and it's like a draw. So here's the thing, Jesus is the center of this, really, really has the ability to just drag people into God's presence, and I get a demonstration, and it's government officials, it's ambassadors and all. It's like dragging, you talk, you share your testimony, share your business concepts, and all. And it drags people into God's presence, and you get a lot of teary eyes. The Holy Spirit is at work. And that's the fun part of this. I get the front seat view of God's brilliance and how he works.
So let me take us into the Q&A time with a question. So intentionally, we've been trying to jump all over the place with some thinking, hopefully spurring some thoughts. So those of you that have questions, now's a good time to send them in. But I'd like to ask each of you kind of a practical, pragmatic question, and that would be, in your way of thinking, what's one or two practical steps that an American church could take in the right direction? Let's not figure out the whole thing, but what are some of the best things that you have seen where churches are beginning to get this concept? Give us one or two practical things a church could do to kind of help move themselves along this trajectory. Larry, you want to start us out?
Yeah, here's a practical thing, and it surrounds the idea of valuing the marketplace. So I would encourage every church pastor and anyone on the pastoral team to visit their parishioners on the job, to take an interest in what the parishioners do in the real world of the marketplace, and understand the value of that, understand their needs, but give them value because of their professional expertise. A second practical one is all of us have seen numerous dedications of a short-term team that goes somewhere for a week, comes back with all these stories. Bring up on the platform graduates of the university, graduates of the teachers programs in our universities, and they're going out into the workplace, and dedicate them as missional people in the professional world. That's a practical thing. You can do that next Sunday.
Oh. Larry, for some reason, we kind of lose your feed right when you get to the punchline. Hold those thoughts, and I think we got most of the idea there. We'll come back to you on that. Jeff, one or two really practical things.
Oh man, I was hoping you're going to Don next, so I could play off of that. I think that there's a key thing, and that is, as a startup company in kind of this whole realm, and I'm a startup guy, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I think that the biggest challenges in that side is the funding of doing this, that we see so often, again, even many missions, church missions teams, they have more dots on the map than support somebody deeply. And so, it's $50 a month. I don't know what the numbers are. Larry probably knows them better, but I think on average right now, from the time somebody gets the calling to go, it takes them 7 years to raise support to get into the field. And after that, another 3 years before they see their first relational conversion. Wow, 10 years from the time you get the call, instead of just saying, here you go, we're going to support you. You've been part of our body, and God's called you to go do something with the skills that he's given you. See the people in the pews differently and look at them as, if we invested in them, where could the kingdom go? And it's an investment. Quit thinking about it as just giving. There's certainly overhead that is not there for the average company when we take on these tasks and these projects in the countries that we go into, from Mozambique to anywhere in Asia. Man, there's a lot of things that the average business would never spend on to do that we do. And the backing of the church could be powerful to change its mindset on what missions is and looks like.
Just a quick thought, Tom. The early church was persecuted and dispersed to the world. The best thing that could happen for the American church is to lose their tax-exempt status and force the Christians to see the world differently in terms of the gospel. They would retreat into the world, or they would be on fire with their profession for Jesus, I think.
Preach it, Larry.
Don, give us something practical.
Practical that what I most needed from the American church.
Not yet, not
Pie,
that.
sunshine, nuts. Pie, sunshine, nuts. Pie, sunshine, nuts.
All right. So,
You know why? Why? Because here's the thing.
Pass them out on Sunday.
I sit there and I say, we just keep giving. We create, the thing that we're trying to do is replace dependence with independence, replace handouts with hand-ups, replace entitlement with earning something, the pride of a paycheck, replace despair with hope, replace adversity with opportunity, stagnation, replace it with transformation, worthlessness, replace it with dignity, failure, replace it with excellence. What we're building here is the goose that lays the golden eggs. Milton Hershey gave his company, which now has been taking care of thousands of orphans and disadvantaged children for 100 years, based on an economic engine of chocolate. Okay? So when you look at what do I need from the American church, a realization that we can really radically change the face of the earth based on understanding, and what would I do? It would be so wonderful at a church to say, any businessman say, hey, would you draw together with the pastor there and talk about these principles and talk about what can we do in the church that would radically transform our community by sharing all our God-given skills and experiences and vocations and all with those, the poor, the widow, the orphaned, those suffering around. You don't have to go to Africa. God called me to Africa, but it's everywhere. There's opportunities everywhere. And it's just the paradigm shift that needs to happen. And that paradigm shift is a businessman that's lit on fire, because a couple of them light on fire in the church and all the other ones will draw into it, and you're going to get a radical transformation that's going to benefit the world.
Thanks, Don. So we could talk at length, and at some point maybe I really want to. I have found that one of the most difficult issues to talk about that to me is not nowhere near honestly talked about is how we use donated dollars to help business startups. And I totally get that you're starting to meddle or mix certain things, but the reality is that these businesses, mission kinds of things, can't start without invested dollars. And there are ways for you to actually use donated dollars to actually start businesses that are genuinely helping to create human flourishing and that kind of stuff. We'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end, but we started a fund called the SAT Catalyst Fund that is completely there to incentivize churches to just do this, in which we will actually match investment dollars from a church into something that maybe Don was doing or something that Jeff was doing. And we're still, but we will not do it just with businessmen and women on their own. There are plenty of organizations out there that are doing this kind of thing with Christians that kind of just go around their church because churches don't understand it. We believe that if you could incentivize the local congregation to begin to understand this whole concept, that the average pastor reaches people that none of us would reach, who would begin to get that idea, and we would set into motion, I believe, all kinds of donated dollars that would go into these kinds of things. But that's a conversation. Yeah, Jeff.
Tom, that's one of the reasons that I really push on how the church sees us as being part of the church. I hate the phrase parachurch. I totally push against it, because most of what we call parachurch is just the church acting out the church, right? And so if our pastors could simply acknowledge what Don is doing, what we're doing as actually ministry, then the people of the body would feel like they could be freed to get involved in it. It could be that simple.
I think you're right. I really do. And I think that's what what we as an organization are trying to do is simply saying, look, Pastor, we get that this whole concept is fuzzy at best, and that there's all kinds of things pulling on you. But I would argue that until this becomes, until the average pastor can get their head around this, that this will not scale within the North American church, and it has to scale within the North American church, at least in this particular time, because of the resources that are located there. And if you look back at when William Carey was told to shut up, young man, sit down, when God wants to reach those heathens, that was 300 years ago, at the start of the modern missionary movement. So every pastor around didn't get what William Carey was trying to do. But do you realize that within 50 years of that statement, every denomination had a mission board? And I would argue the reason they had a mission board was the modern day missionary movement became understandable to the average pastor. That's what scaled what's happened over the last 250 to 300 years. And what everybody is seeing right now is that missionary work has to change. It cannot continue along the trajectory. That trajectory was not wrong. It just served its purpose. And now the role that business plays as we work around the world is going to become central in that whole thing. And it's not just outside the U.S., it's also becoming an issue within the United States as well. So, well, we'll talk more about that. I want to get to some questions right now. We've still got about 15 minutes for some questions, and then to give you guys a quick little end. What do you need most from the North American church? Look, we've had a number of questions that have come up here about the Missio Dei, and I don't want to take a ton of time. And to the participant that was asking some of these questions, I hope I get your definition of Missio Dei. You'll be satisfied with the way I'm going to describe it here. But when I think of the Missio Dei, I think of it in terms of God's redemptive purposes for all of creation. And that the mission of God is to redeem body, soul, spirit, the world at large, that the secular sacred divide, it's all about the human flourishing and what God is doing. So some of these questions, and this is for any one of you who've got some thoughts, is that, how countercultural is Missio Dei to the current American culture? And what do you think it's going to take for the American church to kind of embrace that kind of mission, Missio Dei, the whole of human flourishing and the whole of redemptive purposes for God in the world? Somebody, any one of you.
I tell people that I won't see that happen. And of course, I'm older than all of you, but I don't think any of you will see it happen either. Maybe Jeff, he's a real young buck. But what's going to happen is there's going to be a lull here where the Missio Dei of God we're going to grapple with that culturally and theologically, and probably will be 20 years or so, just like time of the Reformation. Lots of persecution, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of revolution in the seminaries, until it's finally understood. And then the gospel will take off again. That's how I see it. I don't see, and I'm sorry for every pastor that's listening, but I don't see the current pastors who have the vested interest in their denomination, in their seminaries, in their families. I don't see them changing significantly. But I do see my grandson's generation changing. I see them as in the forefront of this. If we can empower them, we have done an amazing thing for the kingdom of God.
Thank you. Anyone else on that? So
Dr.
another
Larry
question.
covered pretty good.
So, where are you finding this conversation about the Missio Dei in the U.S. church today? Are there places where this conversation is happening? Who are some of the organizations and people that are lending a voice to this?
Honestly, I would say I other than with Dr. Sharp, I haven't had that conversation with anybody. So I don't know. To be transparent.
So we're kind of, thank you for that honesty. The truth is, this whole thing how we push it to gain some momentum is stumping a lot of us. We all realize that it's got to happen. We're wondering what it is going to take. I still believe in the idea of critical yeast. I think one of the things that will make this happen is that it's just going to take half a dozen churches to say, we'll try it. We'll go and we'll fail forward. I think we're so afraid of taking risks in this space and the need to succeed at these things. I think we also have to wrestle with the fact that for many churches, missions is part of their brand management. I mean, we're trying to prove that we're a great commission church, or we're trying to prove that we are a great commandment church. And we don't want to do anything that's going to kind of take away or risk any of that sort of stuff. And the truth is, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about that needs to be done in this space is still yet to be figured out. And I think it's going to take some critical yeast, some folks that are willing to risk, try some things. I think it's going to require pastors to create space for business-minded people and get out of their way.
Tom, could I encourage people to read everything you've written on critical yeast? I think it's very much aligned with disruptive innovation that came out of Clayton Christensen and Harvard. It's very much aligned with that. And I think that's a key component. I guess where we may differ is how long the yeast will take to flourish. But I think the concept that you've got it nailed, and I encourage people to read that.
Thank you. Well, another question. So much of the churchy business have a poor concept of the difference between giving and investment. What is needed to train people up and to avoid these traps? Don, give us some thoughts right there. I mean, you made a lot of money. You spent time giving. And where did some of those things start to click for you, the difference between giving and investing?
As financing has been very difficult for me, Jeff. Jeff alluded to that. There's so many things that are being funded in the secular world. We just visited an NGO / for-profit business that's getting tens of millions of dollars because they're pushing the right buttons to the secular things that are important: climate change, women. These are things that are important to the church too. But it kind of goes back to the other question too, which is I've gone to churches, I speak at churches, everyone loves it. But at the end, it's like, okay, well, where do you fit? You don't have a place here. You don't fit. And, I wish we have a 501c3 because our 90% shareholder distribution flows into a 501c3. So, hey, they can give, and we do our work at orphan care and that type of thing. But to fund the business, and they immediately, I have some people who really get it, but they immediately put on their business hat. What's the return on investment? And I have people like, okay, well, you're doing all these great things, great Jesus work and all, but I like a 20% return, and you seem a little desperate. So I gotcha, and it's like, oh my gosh, but hey, if you had a foundation or this was before, I could write you a check, so there's a whole mindset difference between charity, which in their minds, I think makes them feel good, versus investment. How much can I make off this? So it's this whole concept of, well, wait a minute, the charity stuff, you're just going to keep dumping and dumping and dumping and dumping, and really they're not doing the things that really are holistic and will be the real solution to, wow, this is something that I can even return your money back, and you're going to see this come to fruition, all these positive things happen for a significant amount of time, So I don't know the answer to it because I keep hitting, Bob Lupton, talked about banging his head, because he's dealt with this for decades, and it's this realization, I think, of, hey, this whole paradigm shift where they understand that this is this is missions to the next level, and this is maybe a transition like Larry talked about that might take a while.
I do think there's some yeast happening here, though. Henry Kastner, for example, if you check out the websites, Faith Driven Entrepreneur and Faith Driven Investor. I think, there is some critical yeast happening in this area. People are starting to understand that maybe they could take 2% of their portfolio and invest it in these business startups, hoping for return, but if not, at least I'm having kingdom value. So I see some hope here. We're still on the front end, but there's people working on it.
Well, in any environment, take that, biomed or tech, the initial companies in those sectors are chipping away at the barriers of things, right? They're R&D companies. And we're still, I would argue, in an R&D cycle for how do we do this well, right? And so it's really easy to point our finger at everyone that failed, but even in the tech company, what's the number one reason an organization fails? Underfunding, right? Is that it took more than the initial investment team could carry to the finish line on anything. And we have to look at things this way. We have to say, wait a minute, we're figuring out how to do business in third world countries. One of the countries we work in, it took us a year to get through customs with our products, right? Because there was no, trade set up in the country. They didn't even know how to handle our crazy little fibers that I've got hanging on the wall behind me. We have to say that it is more important for us to invest in the kingdom than it is in our 401ks before this is ever going to work from a financial standpoint. I don't know how else more blatantly to put it.
So let me say this, and with hopes that there are some pastors on, mission pastors as well, and others that can kind of get to that. I would say there's no shame in being where we are right now, and the frustration and all of that sort of stuff. The shame would be in backing away from it, of not stepping up to the challenge and to say, listen, whatever these things look like moving forward, they have to be figured out. They have to be discovered. They have to be tried. And I believe what God is saying is, come on, church, you can do this. I have put so much resources in the hands of the North American church, such that to him who much has been given, much will be demanded. And to say, and I believe God is saying, come on, I'll go with you. I'll help you figure this out. We'll figure out things that you've never thought about before. And we can figure out how to do missions in a way that makes sense in the 21st century, both locally as well as globally. But it's going to take those willing to risk, those willing to try in the whole process. So, gentlemen, we're gonna get out of here by close thereabouts to 12:15. The idea behind this was to answer the question: what do you need the most from the North American church? So, in a minute or so, each of you tell me, what do you need most? What would you say you need most from the North American church? Jeff, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, I'm going to go right back to the topic we just covered, right? We need financial engagement, not just in us particularly, but we need the American church to step up and get behind the freedom businesses. We're part of the Freedom Business Alliance as well. We need the church to see what it's going to take in this environment to flourish in the kingdom. And that's going to take a change of opinion on your finances.
So we're going to be sending out an email in the aftermath of this webinar, and we're going to create some links and that kind of stuff. Jeff, you'll get us some stuff about freedom businesses that we can put in that. Yes?
Happy to.
Be glad to do that. That's what you need. Larry, what do you need the most?
Well, I'll just repeat a comment earlier. We need empowerment of God's people in the pew to get involved, and as missional people. If companies like Don or Jeff need an accountant, or they need digital marketing, or whatever they might need, there are resources in the church. And the pastoral team can help empower those people. And I think that's very important.
Thanks, Larry. Don, What would you say to the American church? What do you need the most from the American church?
Yeah, I think it's an embracing of the concepts. Right now I have, Gordon College. I just had a case study, a guy from Wheaton College. I've spoken at Messiah. They're the Christian colleges, but then there are these secular colleges as well. The young millennials and I think it's Gen Z now, all of them are wanting this, okay? The church should be the ones to motivate the people within their pews. It's not just the businessmen, but the youth groups and all. I mean, invite people like Jeff and Larry and myself in to talk and stimulate this. Be open to the ideas and the concepts, So when that happens, then the other things, the financing, the people wanting to help, opening up the buying of the products, that's an easy one, I mean, but for them to understand that this is a really high impact way of missions and also building the kingdom and breaking down barriers and all the things we've talked about here. So I think it's for the pastors to open up and embrace, because I guarantee you, they got a ton of college kids who would love to talk about this in their church. Okay.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Because I know the college kids that speak to me. So it's already happening. It's just been stifled, not talked about or whatever. And it's just like, turn on the light and let's shine some light on this subject.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much. Let me say a couple of things as we close here. We are hoping to do a follow-up webinar with some US-based groups that are doing a similar kind of things. But I wanted to quickly run through a couple of things to the participants. And I hope that you'll take a minute and jump out on our websites and look at some of the things that we've been talking about. Here's the SAT Catalyst Fund, and it's really a unique idea. There's a way that you can get in touch with us. We really are looking for the first church that would be willing to participate in this, believing that down the road, as we get more and more people doing things like this, it'll make sense to other people in the process. And then I hope that you will also go to our website and see the upcoming webinars. So if you go to the service sections on our main website and you go down, you'll see some various webinars that we've got coming up. The next one in just about 2 weeks is going to be, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button there. The next one is going to be with looking at something in the local dimension. We'll be talking with Mike Sicosio and James Whitford, and how can the U.S. church best serve the homeless population in our communities right now. Barna did a study asking pastors what was foremost on their mind, and the thing that came in dead last in that, only 2% of the pastors said they were thinking of and trying to figure out how to mobilize resources and people to help the homeless in their community. Only 2%. And so we get the notion that we're all struggling in the world. But boy, if the church loses sight of what it can do in this space, we're in trouble. We really are. So how do we figure that out? How do we begin to understand what our response would be? And then our whole reason for existing is we find that it takes a church 2 to 3 years to actually change the trajectory of their mission work, to begin to get this into the DNA. We call it Missions 3.0. And we have a workshop, and then we have peer learning communities. We're going to do an online 1-hour introduction to Missions 3.0 on August 20th, and you can register for that as well. We hope that you'll join us on that. And we are just praying that God would give us churches willing to step into this space and begin to figure out what it's going to look like for the church in the 21st century. So, gentlemen, thank you for your willingness to give us this time. And I want to thank each of you participants for taking the time to join us in this webinar. It will be uploaded today or tomorrow, and from there, we hope you'll share this with folks and bring them in this conversation as well. So thank you very, very much. God bless you, and hope to see you in a couple weeks on our next Voices from the Front Lines. Gentlemen, thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.